Welcome back to the Alti stage here at Founders Forum. We are broadcasting live on Bloomberg, so no swearing, gentlemen. For anyone who was with us over the last session, it really was a special one with Deepak Chopra. And one of the key things I took away from it was that part of the path to joy and happiness is creativity. And really, creativity is all about disruption, which is what all of you do. So it's very fitting that our next session is all about the art of disruption. We're joined by Robert Vis, founder and CEO of Bird CRM and the cloud communication platform, and also Niklas Zennström, who's founding partner and CEO at Atomico, who's also previously co-founded and managed globally successful tech companies like Skype, Kazaa, and Jolted. Over to you, gentlemen.
Thank you so much, and so good to be here at the Founders Forum. It's and at this stage, and enjoying a conversation with Robert. So our topic here was disruption, and I think first maybe people thought Robert's has been and continued to disrupt communications. I have a history of doing that with Skype, but we thought about elevating this a bit more about what it really means when we talk about disruption and really what it's about creating lasting value, and that's what we want to talk about. So maybe I start asking you, Robert, how are you motivated by disruption? How do you think about that, and how does that motivate you?
It's an interesting question. I think I think about disruption in itself as more as creating things versus actually the word disrupt to be disruptive on something. I don't think you do anything to be disruptive. I think you like to create things, and then what you're trying to create, and if you're trying to innovate, then per definition, the thing that you might be doing might be disruptive to an incumbent or to what people think are the status quo. But I don't think disruption in itself is ever a goal.
Yeah. And you said disrupting someone or something is how important is then your goal of achieving something that is lasting for your customers, for your companies, versus disrupting as in kind of taking out your competitor, the incumbent, trying to destroy it. Does it matter? Is that just like a side effect and it doesn't matter?
Is there a thought behind that question? You should always be methodical about the things that you do, and your goal is always to serve your customers. So whatever you do and whatever business decision you take, the goal ultimately is to serve your customers better. But I think part of being a founder is both being good at product and building and being relatively good at business. And sometimes, slapping your competitors can help in creating more value for your customers. And that's the reason you should do it, not just because it's fun.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And the mental model I have for this is that it can be a really forceful motivator for the team, to rally the team about winning against someone else. But that's not the end goal, right? The end goal is to create something that's better, that, as you said, better serves your customers, maybe something that's more sustainable and lasting. And if you have that as an end goal, then whatever happens to your competitors or your incumbent is a side effect. But I find it really, really good motivator. I remember back in the days of Skype, we were so motivated, the team, because the global telecom companies, they had such a monopoly on telephony, and people could not, had to pay a bunch of money to talk to their friends and loved ones. But so that was a kind of a great way to motivate everyone to work really, really hard. But at the end of the day, when we sat down and worked, it was all about how do we delight our users, how do we create the best possible service. But you're now you're not fully an incumbent now, but you've been around for quite a few years, 13 years, I think it is, and you have a really big business. But you have also recently been disrupting yourself. So let's talk about that for a moment, how we think about kind of self-disruption or challenging yourself. You slashed your prices, you rebranded the company. Now you're talking about CRM. It used to be kind of SMS communication. That is something that's really, really hard for a corporation to do. If you're have a CEO who's hired, maybe you're a public company. Here you are, you're a founder-led company. You made some really bold decisions. Before we even talk about what it is, how was that process? How did your board think about that? How did your investors think about, it's hey, I'm going to just kind of kill my pricing? You were a pretty profitable company before this. I think you still
This is
are
a live
profitable.
stream, right?
Yeah, you're
This
still
is
pro-
like where I'm
you're
supposed
still
to be politically
profitable.
correct. I would say most people are pretty supportive. It's one of those things where, like, when we wanted to rebrand from MessageBird to Bird, I think for me, it was always very, very logical. And my thesis was very simple. Scooter company isn't going to be around. Shoe company might not be around. The two companies, but like, it's just like, what's the longevity of these companies? I think it's very, very hard for them to be around. And at least one of them, I was right. But so I think, and Bird was just a cooler name. So for me, this was like, and it was also like more the bridge between like B2B and consumer. And I did a lot of research around like, what does it mean to rebrand and what can you rebrand? And we're not a big enough company like Facebook that can call themselves Meta, or like Google that can call themselves Alphabet, because we don't have that money and power to sort of do it. So Message Bird, lose Message, keep Bird kind of still made sense. But most people were pretty against it, actually. Same with slashing prices. People were pretty against it. But that's just because people are scared. So people don't like change. It's like you don't like change. And then if people don't like change, then you want to kind of keep things as they are. And I think founders want to change things because they look into the future and they think about, okay, where's the future heading? Is my product still the same as it, today as where the future is going? And if it's not, then you're actually pretty capable of doing it. And at the end, people were very supportive. It was actually very cool for anybody who ever wants to do a rebrand. It was very cool. Everybody was pretty against up until the day that we did it, and then the next day we were called Bird, and it was that simple. And everybody calls us Bird. Nobody calls her. It's very. So you just got to do it.
Yeah, and it's brilliant. And but also then you change your business model as well. And because again, as I said, you were nicely growing. You pretty good market share, really big market, big upside, good profitability. So why disrupt yourself? Was that because you're feeling like, oh, maybe we're an incumbent now, and you might have startups there to maybe disrupt you? Do you think about that, or is it just?
Yeah, part of it, 100%. I think that it was a few things. First of all, disruption. We just didn't believe that the next 10 years were going to be like the previous 10 years. So I think you should first principle think everything that you do. And it's really easy to believe in like your own story and like what your people want. And especially if you're profitable and you're growing and, the times change the past couple of years, obviously, in the markets. And then if you're actually doing quite well while the markets are changing, it's easy to kind of stay in there. But we just, first principle thinking, we did not believe that the past 10 years were going to be the same as the next 10 years. Yeah, and then the only path forward for us was just to change and to innovate. And we'd actually made that bet already to Bird CRM. We made the bet to Bird CRM 3.5 years ago, and we started building the product. So we were ahead of in that sense. Just we took prices to zero. We took margins to zero. I mean, it is what it is. But it's what the space needs to evolve and to continue.
Yes, and now kind of once you've done it, it feels good. It was the right thing to do.
It feels good, and you've been very supportive.
Yes.
You invested. You've always been a very supportive investor.
No, because you take the long-term view, and I think this is also the founder's privilege, where these are decisions that is very, very hard for a board to take or like a hired CEO. And I think this is really the thesis that I have, and I think everyone who's attending Founders Forum probably have this thesis that those kind of big, bold decisions for the long term is really the privilege of founders to take. And I think our role as investors need to be supportive of those, right? We can, of course, ask difficult questions kind of to stress test it, but ultimately, you have the best as a founder. You have the 360 degree of your business. And by the way, you are also the one who has much more at stake than anyone else, around you. So it's like, if you're going to make that decision as a founder, you probably is the right decision, right? And then it might be a bit of a rocky road when you do a change, as you said. Many times people are afraid of changes because it's also kind of
it's excruciating hard.
Yes,
it's that hard.
Yeah, and what about your team? Because it's one thing that you intellectually decided and you convinced your board and your investors. But what about the team? How did you motivate your team to make these changes? Has this been rallying them? Has it been scared? Have they been resisting it?
All of it. It's excruciating hard. It's like the word excruciating is actually stolen from Elon, who said this at something, but I feel I resonate so much with it because it's like, it is that hard. just if you're 13 years in and you're trying to like change things and you're kind of going back, and it's super hard for your team because everything is different in our company than it was a year ago. Just you have no idea. We went from infrastructure to application, which is completely different. The way you think, the way you build infrastructure, you're very focused on the abstraction layer and everything that's behind there. In an application company, you're focused only on your customers and every little feature. Like we change the button for left to right and you get 50 support tickets. You don't, as an infrastructure company, you don't think about that because your API is basically the same. So everything is very different, and it's been a huge adjustment for the team. We're just super fortunate to have a really, really amazing team, and that stick with us and through all the craziness. And then once you stick through it, you get validation from customers. So at the end of the day, we're only here for customers. We only serve our customers, and we're not, so. As soon as you start getting validation and people believe, and we had their first customer, display 6 different platforms. It was first e-commerce customer, Baybrow. If you have anything to do with your brows, you should do it. She's going to love it that I just said this about her. But she actually took away 6 different platforms into our single platform. That was huge for our team to basically see that change happening. So I think that's ultimately, this isn't, again, it's not about disruption, it's not about ego, it's about customers. And if you're able to serve your customer well, make them happy, then all of it will be okay.
And in this process, as the CEO, what did you do differently than done before? Because I think that you kind of had to lean in a bit more in the product and the team. How did your engagement with your team, did that change? Did you just tell them or?
I mean, I did a few different things. I definitely was more involved. Again, it's very much like 10 years ago when I started the company. It's just like 100-hour work weeks every single week, no holidays, 7 days a week. There's no Saturdays, no Sunday. You're up in the morning. You're in it. You know every feature change. You're in Jira. So it's very different than when you're scaling a company, right? Then no matter how product focused you are, your priorities in a day just changed. So I took the hard decision. I took out every middle layer management of the company. Let them all go. Have about 30 direct reports at the moment, and everybody underneath me also very, everybody has like 10 plus reports. So it's very lean company for I guess our size, but you get super fast execution.
Yeah. And I think you had a pretty much like remote work environment. How's that working with these fast changes?
It's tough. I'm a 50. I don't know. I might be more on the non-side of remote, but these days, I don't know. It's super tough. It's tough. It's
because you need to be with people. It matters, when the situation of change, right? It's also that they need to see you, right, as their leader, and that they need to see you in the eyes and see that you believe in this. That's going to be fine, right?
So we did 2 So last year we did 2 all company offsites. For example, to bring everybody together. It's super hard because you're right. It's very different if you're in a room emotionally talking about a change that you're trying to make in a company, or you're talking into a video screen in front of. It's just the emotional connection just isn't there. That's extremely hard. I also don't have a solution for that. Very outcome driven. So if you go to bird.com/updates, you'll see we release everything that we do in the company is public facing. So continuous deployment. Every release goes to the public. So we manage a lot towards outcomes, which I think works well if you're a remote company, but it's still very, very difficult to build that emotional human connection. If you and I were here in this room and there would be no people here, this engagement would just be different, and it's unexplainable why.
Yeah, 100%. And this is interesting because I think we talk about disruption, right? And of course, since we're in a panel and we're on a tech conference, we have to talk a little bit about AI. Because obviously AI is the technology that is this disruptive technology for all companies. And I've been speaking to a few founders of scale-ups, like big scale-ups like your size or even bigger, where the CEOs who are founders, not hired CEOs, founders, realizing, okay, this is a big shift and we want to be on top of this, right? And then they also have to change their engagement models. Like maybe we're as leaders, CEOs kind of trying to be delegating, showing the direction. But when there's this moment of a big technology shift and they know we need to change inside ourselves how we do things. For example, you have a large, Sebastian Szymkowski talked about this publicly, what they did at Klarna with really rationalized customer service, and I think you've done something similar. He had to go in himself in a very, very different mode, like much, much more like they were when they were a small startup. Go really, go deep in the organization, had meetings, with the developers, go into Jira and really, really look at it, and also kind of actually a moment of actually coming in and telling people what to do rather than maybe you should try some AI, because it wouldn't happen, right? So it's an interesting kind of engagement model when you have this situation of disruption. I don't know how lasting it is, and I think you're still in this, right? So because this 100 hours work week may not be lasting, right? So let's talk about how, because we started our talk about, it's about disrupting, creating a value that is lasting, right? And creating lasting, enduring companies. So and now you're in this, like, you're in the fury of kind of self-disruption, self-renovating yourself for the next 10 years, which is amazing. You have like the next stage as a startup, as a scale-up stage. But how do you transition? You might not even, have been thinking about it so much, but at some point you also need to transition this to a bit more of a steady state company again, or is it going to be 100-hour? Well, for you, I guess it is. But how do you think
I don't know, how many hours do you work?
I never counted my hours.
Exactly.
It's because it's fun.
But isn't that? I don't know if it's as much about like. I don't know what is steady state. I don't know what that like. I think we're at the verge of. If you talk about disruption, we're at the verge of like complete disruption. I mean, who knows if B2B SaaS companies will survive in 5 or 10 years, right? Who knows if any company survives? So there's like so much. I mean, I was in Seoul and there were like robots bringing me food. So like, I don't know, like things can go so different that I just think if you're a founder that you're just you're like excited, you're scared, you're emotional, you're anxious, you have a lot of emotions going on, I think. And by the way, for almost every founder that I know, that's exactly the same thing. Talking about Sebastian, it's actually super funny. Sebastian Klarna is a big customer of ours, and we're actually trying to change something. And I hope he doesn't mind him talking about it. And we're actually in a Slack group together, which is super fun because, like, obviously him and I are founders, and then with us is probably 40 other people in there. But I think a founder's job is also to push things forward. Like you have to. You have to push. You have to push things forward, and sometimes that's the only way to do it. Is just to tell people what to do and move forward.
And let's move on. So when we talked last week, you talked about makers and takers. Can you elaborate on what you think about that?
It's good. I was going to ask you this question. So we were talking. Can I say this at this conference? Though is the question. But like. Somebody once taught me this. So basically, there's like makers and there's takers. And it's always like founders and investors. And most investors are takers because they're very focused on money and monetary outcomes. And then obviously, and for what it's worth, like will always be investors that are makers and there will always be founders that are takers. But generally speaking, I think this is quite true. Investors are very focused on how to create returns, how to make money, and love pretending like they care about the founders. And then a lot of oh yeah, this is live. And then I think founders generally care more about creating and innovating and actually care much less about the monetary aspect of it. Most founders would say that they became a businessman because they had to and because it leverages them. I guess, though, my question for you would be, you've been on both sides of this equation, and I've known you for a long time, and you were my Series A investor. But I think you're very unique compared to most people because you were a founder, very successful founder, also a very successful businessman, and then created a VC. What does that mean for you to both be on both sides of that equation? Because you have to drive returns. Yeah. That's the model that you have in the business, and at the same time, I know you deeply, deeply, deeply care about founders and about supporting them.
Sure. Thanks for asking. So when we started Atomico now. 17 years ago or something, after Skype, it was because I wanted to disrupt. Like, I was not pleased with that there was one monopoly on technology, right? It's like Silicon Valley was the one place in the world where you could be serious. If you're ambitious about entrepreneurship or venture capital and creating really enduring value and change by entrepreneurship and technology, that was one place. And I thought, that's great, but it should be everywhere. Great companies should come from everywhere, so we need to disrupt that. But we also need to disrupt the model, because my experience, I had some amazing venture capital investors, amazing partners who were, helpful, but none of them had ever run a company. And they asked me all these questions, like I didn't feel like, always, they had great empathy, but, they hadn't been in my shoes, right? So a little bit different language. So what I wanted to do was like, let's build a different type of firm that is like a founder, culture, founder DNA, have empathy with founders, and then also help them. But so then, in this industry of venture capital, we talk about being founder friendly. And the worst thing to be is just to be a cheerleader for the founders. Like, Robert, is great, whatever you do, continue what you do. Being friendly and to care is also to tell people when they're doing wrong, right? And when, in our view, when they're doing something wrong. And give, frank advice. And it's like, if you have your best friend and you see like your best friend is doing something that's not great, you would probably go for a walk with your friend, have a coffee, and it's like, hey, maybe you should think about this, like a friendly advice. It's like, that's how I think about it. And then it's all about backing founders which are really, really ambitious and have empathy with them, right? But also give advice. But the reality is, like, if you look at all, the most successful companies in the world, like, those are founders who, of course, created huge value for their shareholders and for themselves. But they also were all on a mission to change something, to use disruption, innovation, to build something that's lasting and create real value, and like value for society. And I think that's true for all entrepreneurs, and that's certainly like how I think about venture capital. It's also an industry that needs to be renovated, but it's also like we are all, all boats are rising with the tide, right? So if we all can do this together, that's also what I love about Founders Forum, because everyone is so collaborative here. And it's like, we're meeting with other investors. Sometimes we compete, but we collaborate, we help each other a lot, right? So I think it's about, if you do that and have a long-term view, you create great returns. So I don't think it's mutually exclusive. I think it's actually mutually reinforcing to have a real purpose with founders, and also in investing in companies doing something that's lasting. If you do that well, you create really good returns for investors. Because let's face it, like if we don't make money, it's like it's just nothing is going to be lasting anyway, right? So you need to make returns, obviously.
But how did you create that culture inside of Atomico? Because it's one thing for you to have it, having been both on both sides of the equation, but you've also done a very good job at creating that culture of, really being that, having an operational team and having people help the founder sort of drive. How do you drive that? While I think, generally speaking, most people go work at a VC because they want to make money.
Yeah, I think that I'm pretty sure that everyone who's working at our firm want to make money, for sure, but they want to make money the right way, right? So it's also about, I think it's like when you hire people, you hire people who are super sharp, super ambitious, but also need to be values aligned. And then it's also communicate what our values are and also demonstrate. But I think how it works for us is like, because you see that the model is working, right? Because if you create empathy with founders like you more, they're probably going to be more likely to recommend you, and therefore the flywheel is spinning, because you have better access to founders. So I think that some people are like just intuitively aligned with this. Some people like, actually, it's actually a good business model. So I think like everything you do when you talk about, when you talk about like sustainability or, climate and whatever it is, or even, diversity and inclusion, you need to also be able to link all of those topics back to better business. Mm-hmm. And then you can motivate everyone who's maybe also skeptical. And I think try always to do that, like, why is this better for business? And then it works.
Have you had situations where somebody was very disruptive or had a very innovative idea that you actually emotionally really wanted to back, but then it ended up being very hard because you didn't see the business model?
Yeah, and it's like, for sure, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of super exciting companies that we see that are like really can change things, which have like deep tech companies or like something that's really far out there. But either it's like really hard to see the business model, but that maybe you can still do it, right? Because they might figure it out. The bigger challenge is if there's company that needs like $1 billion or euros to get to market. And then it's like, okay, we can start, but who's going to come next? And I think that's it's a gap in the market, but it's also an opportunity that we need to fill that gap, because also here, today there's so many deep tech founders who are like, fusion and really innovation, but those companies need a lot of money. And it's like, love to invest in them, but it's like when we go back and discuss this as partners in our investment committee, it's like, sometimes it works, sometimes we've done a lot of, deep tech investments, and sometimes, you need to take a little bit of a leap of faith. It's a real funding gap, unfortunately.
Maybe they should add AI in front of their idea. that might actually work.
That's right.
Do you feel that, like, if you look at Europe as a whole and founders sort of coming from Europe, like, and you look at disruption, what is something? Two questions, actually. What is something you think is working really well, and what is something that could work better for, if you would look at I think our talk was before something with Silicon Valley and disruption to Silicon Valley. What's kind of, we're in Europe-ish. I don't know. I still consider UK the Europe, even though I might get kicked out of the country now. But what's sort of like working well? What could we do better to have more long-lasting, really big incumbents?
Yeah. Good question. I know we're over time, so maybe this is the last one. But I would say that, so there's now year 19 of Founders Forum. Like first Founders Forum was here. We were a few of us kind of confused entrepreneurs on beanbags trying to figure out things out. Europe has come a long way. And you have to think about, after the dot-com crash, European tech was kind of wiped out. So it kind of was restarted after that, and kind of coincided when we started Kazaa, I guess, and when Brent was doing kind of, at the end of, lastminute.com. There's some of the stats that is like amazing. Like the last 4 years, more companies have been started every year in Europe than in US. When it comes to seed funding, so funding rounds less than $5 million, Europe is about 29% of the global share. US has, I think, 34, 35%. That gap has halved in 4 years. So we're kind of catching up. Now, the other stats here is that if you receive seed funding in Europe, the likelihood for you to become a billion-dollar company is the same in Europe as it is in the US. So we've come a long way on that really early stage, company creation. And that's because you have recycling of capital and talent. There's about half of successful founders are becoming angel investors and mentors. There's a lot of seed funds now which are started by ex-operators, ex-founders. The thing that we're still lacking is growth capital. So we have the further you come in your journey as a company, the bigger funding gap we have in Europe versus US. So I think that's something that needs to be fixed. It's starting to happen, but it's going slowly. I think the other kind of challenge we have, which is hard to change, right? Because we are distributed. Like there's like whatever, 20, out of these 350 kind of billion-dollar companies in Europe, coming from 120 cities, 29 countries. So there is a lot of ambition, but it's really spread out. So we don't have that gravity and concentration of ambition. And I think that's a challenge because ambition rubs off itself, right? So we need to continue to, that's also why these gatherings are so important, so founders can get together and become even more ambitious. So I think we just need to try to raise our ambition level. But I would say that we're doing pretty well in Europe, but we just need to keep at it and raise the ambition. And I think with that, I think we're out of time.
This is a great note to end on, isn't it? And I like the way you referenced how far Founders Forum has come and how disruptive Founders Forum has been in all this time. Thank you so much for the conversation. I feel like I've been a fly on the wall to something special here. And it's been a pleasure hosting this stage all day for Bloomberg at Founders Forum. Unfortunately, if like me, you are not a founder, we're going to have to vacate the room now. But I'm going to hand over to Andrei Kusin from Miro to lead the next session. Thank you.